They say family will always be there for you, but what if they choose luxury over your child's life? I thought I could count on my parents. When my 17-year-old son, Noah, was left fighting for his life after a devastating accident, I believed they would rush to my side, offer comfort, and stand by me through the darkest hours. But instead, they chose a luxury cruise. While I sat in a cold hospital room, clinging to Noah's hand, praying for a miracle, my parents were sipping champagne under the Caribbean sun, posting pictures of their fabulous getaway. And when they finally called? It wasn't to check on Noah, it was to ask about his insurance money. That was the moment I knew, family isn't about blood, it's about who truly stands by you when everything falls apart. What happened next changed my life forever. And trust me, you won't believe how this story ends. Growing up, I learned early on that love in my family came with conditions. My parents, Richard and Margaret Carter, weren't the warm, affectionate type. They valued appearances, status, and control far more than genuine connection. From the outside, we looked like the perfect upper-class family. My father was a well-known corporate lawyer, my mother a socialite who thrived in high-end charity galas. My younger sister, Vanessa, was their golden child, the daughter they paraded around with pride. Beautiful, ambitious, and effortlessly charming, she could do no wrong in their eyes. And me? I was the one who was expected to be independent. Reliable. The one who didn't need help. When I married Ryan, a driven entrepreneur, my parents barely acknowledged it. When we divorced, they said I should have tried harder. And when I found myself raising my son, Noah, on my own, their response wasn't support, it was condescension. You could have a better life, Olivia, if you just made better choices. That was my mother's favorite line. I stopped expecting much from them a long time ago. But when Noah was born, I hoped, just for a moment, that they would change. That being grandparents would soften them. Maybe they'd finally show up. But they never did. Oh, they loved talking about Noah. Showing off pictures of him at their cocktail parties, boasting about his grades, his athletic achievements. But when it came to actually being present, they always had somewhere else to be. A European getaway. A high-profile networking event. An exclusive golf tournament. And yet, despite everything, some foolish part of me still believed that if the worst ever happened, they would step up. That when it truly mattered, they would finally prove they cared. I had no idea how wrong I was. Before I share what happened next, the moment that made my blood run cold, I want to connect with you. You're watching this story unfold, and I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to stand up for something you believe in, hit that like button, because trust me, this story is just getting started. It was a chilly October evening, and the city lights of Seattle flickered against the rain-slicked streets. I was still at the office, drowning in spreadsheets and deadlines, when my phone buzzed on the desk. At first, I ignored it. But then it rang again, this time an unknown number. Something in my gut twisted. Miss Carter? The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. This is Dr. Ellis from Harborview Medical Center. Your son, Noah Carter, has been in a serious accident. We need you to come immediately. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. What happened? Is he okay? My voice came out shaky, desperate. He sustained severe injuries, including head trauma. He's unconscious, and we're prepping him for emergency surgery. Please get here as soon as possible. I didn't even remember grabbing my coat. 1 second, I was at my desk. The next, I was behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rain pounded against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. Traffic blurred past in streaks of red and white, but all I could hear was the doctor's words repeating in my head. Head trauma. Unconscious. Emergency surgery. Noah was supposed to be safe. He was supposed to be at soccer practice, laughing with his friends, making plans for the weekend. Not lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. The hospital parking lot was a blur. I barely registered my own footsteps as I ran inside, my breath coming in short gasps. The smell of antiseptic and the low hum of hospital monitors filled the air as a nurse guided me down the hallway. Then I saw him. Noah was motionless on the hospital bed, his face pale against the stark white sheets. A breathing tube was taped to his mouth, 4 lines snaking around his arms. The sight of him, so strong, so full of life just hours ago, now so fragile, so still, nearly broke me. "Mom is here, baby. I'm here." I took his cold hand in mine, willing him to wake up, to squeeze my fingers, to give me something. The doctor appeared beside me, his expression grave. "We're doing everything we can, but his condition is critical. The next few hours will determine whether he pulls through." The next few hours. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just a bad night. This wasn't just an accident. This was life or death. And in that moment, I realized I needed my family. Despite everything, despite the years of neglect and disappointment, I still believed they would come through for me. So I did the only thing I could. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. And that was the second worst mistake of my life. The phone rang 3 times before my mother picked up. "Olivia, this is unexpected," she said, her voice clipped, as if I had interrupted something important. I gripped the edge of the hospital chair, forcing myself to speak. "Mom, it's Noah. He's been in a terrible accident. He's in surgery, head trauma. It's bad, Mom. I need you here." There was a pause. A long one. And then she sighed. "Oh, Olivia, that's awful. But listen, your father and I are leaving for our cruise tomorrow morning. We've had it booked for months. Non-refundable, you know how these things work." I blinked, my brain refusing to process what I had just heard. "Mom, I'm not talking about a dinner reservation. Noah is fighting for his life. I need you." "Sweetheart," she said, her tone shifting to something close to patronizing, "you've always been so independent. You can handle this, can't you? Besides, the doctors are there, aren't they?" I felt the air leave my lungs. I had called them in desperation, hoping, praying, that this would be the moment they finally showed up. That this time, when it mattered, they would be different. Instead, they had already checked out. "Unbelievable," I whispered. "You're seriously choosing a luxury vacation over your grandson?" "Oh, don't be dramatic," she scoffed. "It's not like we can do anything. And honestly, Olivia, you should take a break too. Stress isn't good for you." A laugh, sharp, bitter, escaped me. "I don't have the luxury of a break, Mom. My son is in surgery. But I see where your priorities are. We'll check in when we're back," she added breezily, as if we were talking about a minor inconvenience, not a life-threatening emergency. I hung up without another word. I stared at the phone in my trembling hands, my body numb. My mother, the woman who had always preached about family values, about how important appearances were, had just made her choice. And it wasn't us. A nurse passing by must have seen the devastation on my face because she gently touched my shoulder. "Miss Carter? Do you need to step outside for a moment?" I shook my head. No. I needed to stay. I was the only family Noah had left. Hours passed in a blur. The beeping of machines, the sterile hospital walls, the whispered conversations of doctors just outside the door, it all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then, sometime after midnight, the door to the waiting room creaked open. "Miss Carter?" I shot up from my seat as Dr. Ellis walked in, his surgical mask pulled down, deep lines of exhaustion on his face. The surgery was successful. We managed to control the bleeding and relieve the pressure in his brain. But, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "he's still in a coma. The next 48 hours are critical. We just have to wait." Wait. I sank back into the chair, covering my face with my hands. Relief, fear, exhaustion, it all came crashing down at once. "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course." The sight of Noah nearly broke me all over again. He was so still. Tubes and wires surrounded him, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors the only indication that he was still here. I sat beside him, taking his hand in mine. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." As I watched him, my phone vibrated. A notification. At first, I ignored it, but something made me glance down. And that's when I saw it. A social media post. My mother, smiling on the deck of a luxury cruise ship, a cocktail in hand. The caption? "Off to paradise. Life is too short not to enjoy it." The world around me blurred. They hadn't even waited. Hadn't even called to check in. While I was sitting in a hospital room, watching over my son, they were celebrating. Something inside me snapped. I took a deep, shaky breath and turned my phone face down on the hospital table. Fine. They had made their choice. And from that moment on, I made mine. The hospital became my world. Days blurred into nights, and time lost all meaning as I sat by Noah's bedside, clinging to the sound of the monitors, praying for any sign of movement. His face, once so full of life, was now still, too still. I barely slept. I barely ate. The hospital staff began to recognize me, their eyes filled with quiet sympathy every time they passed. "Miss Carter, you should go home for a few hours," one of the nurses, Julia, suggested gently on the fourth night. I shook my head. "I can't." Leaving meant admitting there was nothing I could do. And I refused to believe that. But as exhaustion crept in, a different kind of realization began to settle deep in my chest. My parents weren't coming. They hadn't called. Hadn't checked in. Hadn't even pretended to care. And that truth? It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I knew my parents were selfish. I knew they prioritized appearances over everything. But some naive part of me had still believed that, in a moment like this, they'd choose me. That they'd choose Noah. But they hadn't. And now, I was done waiting for them. That night, Dr. Ellis stopped by during his rounds, his expression unreadable as he flipped through Noah's latest scans. "There's no further swelling in his brain," he said, glancing up at me. "That's a good sign. Does that mean he'll wake up?" He hesitated. "I can't say for certain. Every case is different. But there's something you can do. Studies show that coma patients can sometimes hear what's happening around them. Familiar voices, memories, these things can help stimulate brain activity." I stared at him. "Are you saying I should talk to him?" "Exactly. Talk to him, read to him, remind him of the life waiting for him." It wasn't much. But it was something. So I started talking. At first, my voice was unsteady, awkward, like I was speaking into a void. "Hey, buddy. It's Mom. I know you're tired, but you need to wake up soon, okay? I miss you." "Nothing. Remember your last soccer game? You swore you'd score a hat trick, and instead, you tripped over your own shoelaces in front of everyone." I never laughed so hard in my life. Still nothing. But I kept going. I talked about his favorite movies, his childhood stories, the time he tried to bake cookies and nearly set the kitchen on fire. I played the playlist he always blasted in the car, the one I always pretended to hate. And then, on the sixth day, something happened. It was so subtle, I almost missed it. A twitch. The faintest movement of his fingers against mine. I froze. My heart pounded. "Noah?" "Nothing." I told myself I had imagined it, that it was just a reflex. But deep down, I knew. It was a sign. He was still here. I pressed the call button so hard my thumb hurt. Within seconds, a nurse appeared, and I practically stumbled over my words. He moved. His fingers. I swear, he moved. She didn't dismiss me. Instead, she immediately checked his neurological responses, her expression carefully neutral as she ran through her examination. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up and smiled. "It might just be a reflex," she said. "But it's a good one." Hope. For the first time since that phone call, the one that shattered my world, I felt it bloom inside me. Noah was fighting. And no matter how long it took, I would be right here, fighting with him. A week passed, and Noah's condition continued to show small but steady signs of improvement. His fingers twitched more frequently, his breathing became stronger, and there were moments, brief, but unmistakable, when his eyelids fluttered, as if he were trying to wake up. I held on to those moments like lifelines. And then, just as I was starting to believe things were turning around, my parents walked into the hospital. I had been sitting beside Noah, absent-mindedly stroking his hair, when I heard the sharp click of heels against the sterile tile floor. "Olivia." My mother's voice rang through the room, her tone bright and cheerful, like she was arriving at a damn brunch, not a hospital room where her grandson had been fighting for his life. I turned, my heart tightening as I took them in. Richard and Margaret Carter, perfectly put together as always. My father in a crisp navy suit, my mother in an elegant beige dress, her designer handbag tucked neatly under one arm. Noah was still unconscious, yet here they were, smiling, as if nothing had happened. "We came as soon as we heard he was showing signs of improvement," my mother continued, stepping forward as if expecting a warm welcome. I stood, slowly. "As soon as you heard?" "That's funny. Because I don't remember a single call or text from either of you for the past 2 weeks." Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, Olivia, don't be like that. We didn't want to bother you. Besides, we knew you had everything under control." My hands curled into fists. "Right. Because that's what parents do when their grandson is in a coma, they go on vacation and assume things will work out." My father finally spoke, his voice measured. "No need to make this emotional. We're here now, and that's what matters." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "No. What matters is that when I needed you, you were drinking expensive wine on a cruise ship. What matters is that Noah could have died, and you didn't even check in." Their smiles faltered. "Well," my mother said, recovering quickly, "he's obviously doing much better now. And actually, we wanted to discuss something important." I folded my arms. "Oh, this should be good." Margaret exchanged a glance with my father before carefully choosing her next words. "We've been thinking about Noah's future," she said sweetly. "In case things don't go as planned, we want to make sure everything is handled properly." I froze. "Handled properly?" I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. My father cleared his throat. "We mean his insurance, Olivia. The settlement, any financial arrangements, these are things we should be involved in." The rage that built inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. I stared at them, barely able to comprehend the words coming out of their mouths. "You're asking me about money," I whispered, "while my son is lying in this hospital bed?" "We're just being practical," my father reasoned. "You're exhausted, and these things can be complicated. We only want what's best for." "Stop." The room fell silent. "You don't get to say what's best for him," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You weren't here. You weren't here when I thought I was going to lose him. You weren't here when I sat in this chair every night, hoping, praying, for a miracle. You were gone." My mother's expression hardened. "Olivia, don't be dramatic." "No," I cut her off, my voice rising. "You are not going to stand here and act like you care. Because you don't. And you never have." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. "You know what else I have? Proof. Proof of every call, every conversation. Proof that when your grandson was fighting for his life, you were too busy sipping cocktails to even pretend to care." Their faces paled. "You recorded us?" my father asked, his voice tight. "Damn right, I did." My mother took a step back. "Olivia, let's not make this ugly. We're family." "No, we're not." I turned back to Noah and took his hand, gripping it tightly. He is my family. And I will do whatever it takes to protect him. Which means you. I met their eyes, my voice steady. Are done. They didn't argue. They didn't fight. They simply stood there, stunned, as I turned my back on them for the last time. And as I squeezed Noah's hand, something incredible happened. A small, barely audible whisper. Mom? My breath caught. I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs. Noah's eyes, drowsy, unfocused, were open. He was awake. Mom? That single word shattered the weight of the past 2 weeks. My heart clenched as I whipped around, staring at Noah in disbelief. His eyes, still dazed, still heavy, were open. Noah, I gasped, my voice breaking as I rushed to his side. His fingers twitched weakly in my hand, his gaze fluttering as if he was trying to piece together where he was. You're in the hospital, sweetheart, I said, brushing his hair back gently. You had an accident. But you're okay. You're going to be okay. Tears blurred my vision as he swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. How long? I let out a shaky laugh. Too long. But you're back now, and that's all that matters. Behind me, I could hear the hurried shuffle of nurses and doctors, their voices a mix of excitement and relief as they confirmed his vitals, checked his reflexes. Dr. Ellis gave me a small, knowing nod before stepping back to let me have my moment. Noah was awake. He was here. And my parents? They were gone. I didn't bother looking back to see if they had left the room. It didn't matter anymore. Their presence, their approval, their so-called concern, it had never truly mattered. This moment wasn't about them. It was about us. 3 months later. Winter had settled over Seattle, but for the first time in a long time, the cold didn't feel unbearable. The weight on my chest, the one I had carried for years, was gone. Noah's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. It was slow, painful at times, but he fought through it with the same determination that had always made me proud. His speech improved, his motor skills returned, and by the time the new year rolled in, he was walking on his own again. And today? Today was a big day. Mom. It's here. Noah's voice rang through the house as he sprinted inside, waving an envelope in his hand. I looked up from the stack of work files on the kitchen table, my heart skipping a beat. Is that? He grinned, tearing it open in one dramatic motion. For a second, he just stared at the paper inside. Then, with a slow, shaky breath, he looked at me. I got in. I shot up from my chair. You got in? I got in. Before he could say another word, I had him wrapped in my arms, laughing through my tears. Noah had been accepted into the University of Washington's pre-med program, a dream he had nearly lost, but never let go of. He pulled back slightly, giving me that familiar smirk. Told you I'd make it, Mom. I never doubted you for a second. Later that evening, as the snow quietly fell outside, I sat curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, finally allowing myself to exhale. So much had changed in the past few months. I had cut my parents out of my life completely. There had been no dramatic final conversation, no drawn-out arguments, just a quiet, decisive severing of ties. A few weeks after Noah woke up, they tried to call, to send messages, but I never responded. Eventually, they stopped trying. I had nothing left to say to them. But surprisingly, Vanessa, the sister I had always resented for being their favorite, had reached out. At first, I ignored her texts. But one day, a letter arrived in the mail. A real, handwritten letter. In it, she apologized, not just for how our parents had treated me, but for how she had. She admitted that she had spent years trying to be on their good side, but after seeing how they had abandoned Noah in his worst moment, something in her had shifted. She wanted to change. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she meant it. That night, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, Noah's voice called from the living room. Mom? I peeked my head in. Yeah? He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, a small smile on his lips. You're gonna love this, he said, turning the screen toward me. It was a post from one of my mother's socialite friends. A picture taken at some upscale gala, with a caption that made me snort. Margaret and Richard Carter, Seattle's once elite couple, are no longer the power players they used to be. Some say their social standing took a hit after an unfortunate family matter. What a shame. I chuckled, shaking my head. Looks like karma finally caught up to them. Noah grinned. Guess they should have invested in better priorities. I sat down beside him, nudging his shoulder. Speaking of priorities, Mr. Future Doctor, have you started packing for college? I have months, Mom. And yet, if I don't start nagging now, you'll be stuffing clothes into a duffel bag the night before move-in day. He rolled his eyes, but there was laughter in them. Yeah. For the first time in what felt like forever, things were right. No more waiting for love that would never come. No more chasing approval that was never meant for me. Noah and I had built something stronger, something real. Hey, Mom? Noah said suddenly. I hope you know, you did all of this. You made it happen. I looked at him, this incredible, resilient boy who had survived the worst and still came out stronger, and felt my heart swell. We made it happen, sweetheart. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it. At its core, this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about resilience. It's about realizing that family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who show up when it matters most. Olivia fought for her son, stood her ground, and chose to break free from the toxic ties that held her back. And in the end, she and Noah built a life filled with love, strength, and real support. Now, I want to hear from you. Did this story resonate with you? If you enjoyed it, drop a 2 in the comments. If it wasn't for you, type 7, I value all opinions here. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself or someone you love, hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Because trust me, there's so much more to come. Rock it.